Hello there, my name is Mooseman and today I will be informing you of whether you should play, wait, or avoid the post-apocalyptic exploration game Submerged. As always, we will be looking at gameplay, aesthetics, value, and future potential before making a final verdict on the release version of Submerged. Submerged is an exploration game based around a unique concept, the concept that you cannot die. Submerged developers set out to create a game based around traveling through an abandoned flooded city, but focusing your experience not on the combat, but on exploring the environment via climbing on what is left of the fallen city. The story in Submerged is that you arrive in the city with your brother, who has been critically wounded during your journey. It is up to you to find supplies to ensure that he survives by scavenging the fallen buildings. There are two ways you can explore the city, by boat and by climbing. Your boat will be your primary source of transportation through the city, as the flooded waters provide a Venice-type waterway system around the buildings. Climbing will be used once you find a building that has the supplies you need, by allowing you to scale the outside walls of the buildings. Unfortunately, the gameplay in Submerged is some of the most monotonous, generic gameplay that I have seen in an exploration game. Climbing in particular is not about finding the best way up the buildings, rather it is climbing the same 3 to 4 types of ledges and plants through a mostly linear maze up the sides of the buildings. There is absolutely no challenge in getting to the top, and you'll be lucky if at best the path up the building branches off in a single other direction. The story's setting is one part of the game that I felt would definitely spur on some challenge, as finding the supplies would be challenging in a city that has been long abandoned. But the story does nothing to enhance the gameplay. Saving your brother is not something you do because you feel emotionally attached, rather it just represents the next objective. Instead of actually exploring and using the hints and drawings you find around the city as clues as to where the supplies could be, you just need to climb any large building to the box at the top, which will have exactly what you need no matter what building you climb. After the first 2 buildings or so, the game turns from exploration into repetition as you do the same thing over and over to receive the same opening the box animation time after time again. The lack of combat in Submerged is an interesting idea, but simply removing a main aspect of exploration type games without supplementing it with something equally as engaging is the primary reason that Submerged gameplay comes off as shallow. Submerged needed to have a compelling reason for you to want to explore the city. The innate beauty and scale of the city works initially, but only after a little while you realize that even with all the places to explore, the game lacks anything actually worth exploring. There are some collectible drawings that can be pieced together to tell the story of the city, but that in itself isn't enough motivation. I wanted to learn about the history of the city not through postcards, but through finding real artifacts of what could be considered the old world. The gathering of supplies to help your brother isn't in itself a bad mechanic, but it feels like the developers completely missed the opportunity to give each building its own purpose and story, and instead opted for the approach that lumped them all in the category of important building you need to climb. The aesthetic of Submerged is probably the game's best feature. One positive thing about using the boat is seeing the various wildlife in the city. While the game only has a small selection of animals, 8 to be exact, seeing the whales and dolphins and other mutated sea creatures roaming about gives the city a definite feeling of being alive. Dynamic weather that changes as you play allows you to view the fallen buildings in many different moods and gives you a real sense of scale and feeling of being small. Unfortunately, the actual visuals in Submerged are subpar at best, resulting in the immersion of the game being broken upon looking closer at the grand structures. Textures on the buildings are repeated constantly, in addition to many of them looking very flat overall. There are also multiple places where the textures from one section just end and begin with another texture without any kind of smoothing or effects added to make it seem more natural. The animation in the game is poor as well, especially in the cutscenes. Cutscenes are choppy at best and fail to convey any kind of deep emotion or thought from either of the 2 characters. Both in the game and even in a few cutscenes, there are noticeable amounts of objects popping in and out, removing you from the immersion even further. The best animations are on your character while playing the game, and even she has a noticeable number of sections where her body and scarf are clipping through walls or other environmental objects. While I don't normally nitpick the aesthetic of the game as much as I have, Submerged relies heavily on the aesthetic as a central reason to explore the city. During my experience with Submerged, I was looking very carefully at all the details in the city because it was the only real remotely compelling reason reason to keep exploring the game. This allowed me to appreciate the scale and detail that was given in the city, but it also made the worst offenses stand out even more than they would have in other exploration type games. Submerged has a standard price of $20 on Steam, Xbox Live, and PSN. The gameplay in Submerged is just as short as it is boring, with the main story taking me just under 2 hours to complete. While I didn't collect all the additional objectives, if you're going for a full 100% completion, the game will still only last you max 4 to 5 hours, and that gameplay will be exactly the same repetitive climbing sections as before. The game also has very little to no replayability. The main story of the characters is laughably hollow, and while I won't spoil it, could be told in less than a paragraph without skimping on any details. While Submerged was not a great experience overall, the concept of the game and the world definitely provide the groundwork for a future sequel that expands upon the universe that you only get a glimpse of in this game. The concept of not dying is one of the reasons I decided to review this game. I wanted to see how the developers would show off their world and tell their story without combat or death. The problem is that the developers failed to do this in any meaningful way. The game doesn't use a lack of combat to its advantage, rather it causes the game to feel shallow. In the scenario where this game does get a sequel, I would need to see an extreme increase in the number and quality of game mechanics, story, and general length to get me interested enough to give this style of game another try. Submerged focuses too much on the concept of not dying without replacing the fear and consequence of death with some other form of challenge. The gameplay can only be described as monotonous, even at its dismal main story length of 2 hours. The only thing Submerged has going for it is its aesthetics, and even that is only okay at best since the mediocre repeating textures and the visual problems end up pulling you out of the immersion of the game constantly. Wrap this up in a meaningless, soulless story, and you have a game that I highly recommend that you avoid. While I wish I could have supported a game that attempted to be something different, fresh, and new, especially in an era of sequels and copies, Submerged just doesn't deliver an experience worth your time or money. Thank you for watching my play, wait, or avoid review of Submerged. If you would like to buy the game and try it for yourself, a link to the Steam store page is in the description below. And if you would like to see more of my content, subscribe and check out my channel where I do reviews, news, and other gaming commentary, such as my review of Monotonous, a chaotic arena combat game with bombs and robots, or this past week's episode of PC Gaming News Weekly, where I talk about esports drug testing by the ESL, a Steam exploit that allowed anyone to reset people's passwords, and Solitaire on Windows 10 having a subscription fee.